Halloween Night Blackmail, welcome to Cozy Mysteries. I'm Stephen, and tonight I have a peculiar tale to share, one that unfolded on Halloween night in the wealthy suburb of Kensington, where carved pumpkins grinned from marble steps and designer costumes replaced simple bedsheets. This story begins not with murder, but with a toothache. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Kensington. The renowned detective had been visiting his dentist, Dr. Gerald Pemberton, whose practice occupied a Georgian townhouse on Wisteria Lane. The dental work complete, he descended the steps into an evening transformed by orange lights and artificial cobwebs. Children in elaborate costumes paraded past, chaperoned by parents who clutched stemmed glasses rather than flashlights. Dr. Pemberton caught him at the door. "Monsieur Poirot, might I impose upon you? A most delicate situation has arisen among my neighbours." The detective's eyes narrowed with interest. "A situation requiring my particular skills?" "6 families wish to speak with you, urgently." The dentist glanced toward the street where expensive automobiles lined the curb. "It concerns Vivian Ashcroft." That name meant nothing to the detective then, but the nervous energy in the dentist's voice suggested it should. Within the hour, he found himself in the Pemberton drawing room, facing an unusual assembly. 6 couples sat in careful arrangement, their Halloween finery incongruous with their grave expressions. Mrs. Charlotte Blackwood spoke first, her fingers twisted around a pearl necklace. "Monsieur Poirot, we require your discretion more than your detection." "An interesting distinction, madame." "Vivienne Ashcroft is dead," announced James Hartley, a banker whose costume's fake blood now seemed disturbingly appropriate. "Murdered in her home approximately 1 hour ago. We 6 families were all present in the vicinity during trick-or-treating." "And you wish me to investigate?" "No," said Dr. Pemberton quietly. "They wish you to ensure certain information remains hidden, regardless of who the police arrest." The detective studied each face in turn. Fear resided there, certainly, but also relief. These people were not mourning Vivian Ashcroft. "She was blackmailing you." It wasn't a question, and no one bothered to deny it. Instead, Charlotte Blackwood opened her Prada handbag and withdrew a stack of envelopes, each marked with a different family name. "We've pooled our resources, Monsieur Poirot. £50,000, your fee for protecting our secrets. You ask me to obstruct justice? We ask you to be selective about which truths matter." This came from Richard Sterling, whose tech fortune had funded half the neighbourhood's renovations. Vivian collected secrets like other people collect art. We all had reasons to want her dead. "Then perhaps one of you killed her." The room fell silent. Finally, Amanda Hartley laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. "That's rather the point, isn't it? We don't know which of us did it. We don't want to know. We simply want our families protected from whatever comes next." The detective rose, his expression unreadable. "I must see the body." "The police haven't been called yet," Dr. Pemberton admitted. "We wanted to speak with you first." "Then we waste valuable time. Take me to Mrs. Ashcroft's residence immediately." As they walked through streets alive with innocent celebration, the detective's mind worked through the peculiarity of his position. 6 potential murderers had hired him not to find the truth, but to bury it. The symmetry pleased his sense of the theatrical, even as it offended his devotion to order and justice. Vivian Ashcroft's mansion loomed ahead, its Halloween decorations now seeming prophetic rather than festive. Somewhere inside, a woman lay dead, and somewhere among these nervous families walked a killer who might never be caught unless the detective chose to catch them. The game, as they say, was afoot. Chapter 2. The House of Secrets. The Ashcroft mansion dominated the corner of Wisteria Lane like a Gothic wedding cake. 4 stories of Victorian excess wrapped in orange and purple lights. Tombstones dotted the lawn, and a fog machine pumped artificial mist across the cobblestone drive. Someone had committed fully to the haunted house aesthetic. Vivian hosted the neighbourhood trick-or-treat every year, Charlotte Blackwood explained as they approached. She called it her Halloween Spectacular. Children would come through in groups, following a path through different rooms. It was quite elaborate. The detective observed the property with professional interest. Security cameras blinked red at intervals, and the gate bore a sophisticated lock. Mrs. Ashcroft valued her privacy despite her public displays. She valued leverage, James Hartley corrected bitterly. Every camera, every conversation, every party, she collected information like currency. Dr. Pemberton produced a key. The families have keys for emergencies. Vivienne insisted upon it. She said it built trust. He laughed without humour. We should have known better. The front door opened onto a foyer transformed into a Gothic nightmare. Chandeliers dripped with cobwebs. Real silk, the detective noted, not synthetic. And portraits on the walls had been altered to show skeletal faces. Money had been spent here, considerable money, for a single night's entertainment. Where is the body? The Red Room, second floor. Richard Sterling led the way up a staircase lined with electric candles. Vivienne used it as her trick-or-treat finale, full of mirrors and special effects. The children loved it. They found Vivienne Ashcroft sprawled across an oriental rug, her elaborate Marie Antoinette costume pooling around her like spilled cream. Blood matted her powdered wig, and her face bore an expression of profound surprise. Beside her lay a shattered crystal candy dish, its pieces scattered like diamonds across the hardwood floor. The detective knelt, his movements precise despite the surrounding grotesquerie. She has been dead perhaps 90 minutes. The blood has begun to dry, but the body remains warm. His fingers moved to her neck, checking for pulse while his eyes catalogued details. She was struck from behind, one powerful blow. The killer used the candy dish. We gathered that, Amanda Hartley said from the doorway. None of them had entered the room. They clustered in the hallway like guilty children. You gathered incorrectly, madame. Observe the blood spatter. The detective indicated droplets on a nearby mirror. The pattern suggests the victim was standing when struck, yet she fell forward. This means she turned toward her attacker in the final moment. She knew who killed her. Charlotte Blackwood's hand flew to her throat. Then it was one of us. Or someone she knew equally well. The detective circled the body, noting the position of furniture, the open window, the half-filled candy bowl on a side table. Tell me, was Mrs. Ashcroft expecting visitors this evening? Only trick-or-treaters, Dr. Pemberton replied. The families and their children were meant to come through between 7 and 8. Vivienne would give out candy, show off her decorations. And where were each of you at the time of death? The families exchanged glances. Finally, Richard Sterling stepped forward. That's why we need your help, Monsieur Poirot. We all were here, or near here, or have no reliable alibi. Vivienne had dirt on everyone. Affairs, financial crimes, family scandals. Any one of us might have snapped. Might have, the detective's eyes gleamed. Or did. Silence answered him. These people genuinely didn't know which among them was a killer. The uncertainty bound them together more effectively than any confession. The detective stood, brushing invisible dust from his trousers. I will accept your case, but I accept it on my terms. I seek the truth, not comfortable fiction. If the truth exposes your secrets, so be it. If the truth convicts one of you, I will not hesitate. Do you still wish to retain my services? We have no choice, Charlotte Blackwood whispered. The police will tear all our lives apart. At least with you, there's a chance for discretion. Very well. I will need detailed statements from each family, but first... The detective turned toward the hallway. Where is Mrs. Ashcroft's daughter? I was informed she lived here. The families looked at each other in surprise. Celeste? James Hartley frowned. She should be here somewhere. She usually helped her mother with the Halloween setup. Find her, the detective commanded. Bring her to me. No one leaves this house until I understand exactly what happened here tonight. As the families dispersed to search, the detective returned his attention to the body. Something about the scene troubled him, a discordance his mind couldn't yet identify. The candy dish, the blood spatter, the elaborate costume. They all fit together, yet somehow they didn't fit at all. Murder, he reflected, was like a puzzle with pieces that seemed correct until you discovered one piece had been forced into the wrong place, distorting the entire picture. He suspected this particular puzzle would require all his skills to solve. Chapter 3. The Daughter's Tale. They found Celeste Ashcroft in the conservatory, a glass-enclosed room at the mansion's rear where tropical plants created pockets of humid shadow. She sat on a wrought-iron bench, still wearing her Halloween costume, a striking Medusa ensemble with serpentine headpiece and flowing green robes. Her makeup remained perfect, dark kohl emphasizing eyes that seemed too calm for someone whose mother had just been murdered. Miss Ashcroft. The detective approached carefully, noting how she didn't startle at his voice. She'd been expecting this conversation. You must be the famous detective the neighbours hired. Her voice carried her mother's aristocratic tone but lacked its sharp edge. They work quickly when their secrets are threatened. You know about the blackmail? I know my mother collected information the way others collect stamps. More interesting, more valuable, equally pointless. Celeste's hand drifted to her costume's fabric, where small red stains mark the green silk. I suppose you're here to ask where I was when she died. I am here to understand who your mother was, Miss Ashcroft. The location of your person during the murder will reveal itself through the natural course of conversation. This earned him a sharp glance of appraisal. You're different from what I expected. More precise. I have been called worse things. Please tell me about this evening, your mother's plans for the trick-or-treating. Celeste stood, moving to a cluster of orchids that bloomed obscenely purple in the dim light. Mother had been planning this Halloween for months. She called it her masterpiece. I assumed she meant the decorations, the theatrical elements. She loved spectacle. But you discovered otherwise? The young woman's shoulders tensed beneath the costume's elaborate draping. 3 days ago, I found drafts of a ransom note in her desk. She was planning to fake her own kidnapping during trick-or-treat, blame it on one of the families, and demand money. She'd already picked her scapegoat, Richard Sterling. His company was being investigated for securities fraud, and Mother had documents proving his guilt. She figured he'd pay anything to keep them hidden. The detective absorbed this information without visible reaction. You confronted her about this scheme. I tried. She laughed at me, said I was naive to think 6 wealthy families could keep their sins hidden forever, said she was simply monetizing assets that would otherwise go to waste. Celeste's voice cracked slightly. She'd become a monster, Monsieur Poirot. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way she stopped being my mother and became something else. And yet you helped her prepare for tonight's festivities. What choice did I have? She turned, and the detective saw tears tracking through her makeup. She was still my mother, and I hoped, foolishly I know, that I might talk her out of it, that there was still some goodness left in her. When did you last see her alive? Celeste's hand went unconsciously to her Medusa headpiece, adjusting serpents that needed no adjustment. Around 7:15, she was in the red room making final preparations. I'd been helping downstairs, getting the candy stations ready. She sent me away, said she wanted to be alone for a few minutes before the families arrived. And after that, I came here, to the conservatory, to think. She gestured at the humid space around them. This was the only room Mother never touched. She called it my sanctuary. I suppose even she recognized I needed somewhere to escape her. The detective walked slowly around the room, examining plants with the same attention he'd given the crime scene. Tell me, Miss Ashcroft, in your mother's ransom note drafts, did she specify how the fake kidnapping would occur? She planned to stage it during trick-or-treating. There would be so many people moving through the house, so much chaos. She'd disappear into the confusion, hide in the wine cellar for a few hours, then escape with a dramatic story about being taken by masked figures. Masked figures who conveniently looked like Mr. Sterling's security staff. Exactly. Celeste's laugh was bitter. She'd thought it through. It was supposed to happen at 8 o'clock, right after the last group of children came through. That's when she'd scream, and everyone would see her being dragged toward the back exit. The detective consulted his pocket watch. But she died around 7:30, half an hour before her elaborate plan could unfold. Yes. Celeste met his gaze directly. Someone killed her before she could destroy more lives. I suppose I should feel worse about it, but honestly, I'm relieved. Does that make me a terrible person? It makes you honest, mademoiselle, a rare quality in this house of secrets. He paused, studying her face. Did you kill your mother, Miss Ashcroft? She didn't flinch from the question. Would you believe me if I said no? I would believe the evidence, which tells its own story regardless of words. The detective moved toward the conservatory door. You will please remain here while I continue my investigation, and Miss Ashcroft, do not attempt to clean your costume. The stains may prove significant. As he left, he heard her whisper, "They already are." Chapter 4. The Alibis and the Lies. The detective assembled the 6 families in Vivian Ashcroft's drawing room, a space that even without Halloween decorations would have intimidated visitors with its calculated grandeur. Chippendale furniture arranged in judgment, paintings whose subjects seemed to follow movement with condemning eyes, and a crystal chandelier that caught light like frozen tears. "We will proceed methodically," the detective announced, settling into a wing chair that positioned him to observe every face. "Each family will account for their whereabouts between 7 and 8 this evening. You will understand that contradictions will be noted, evasions remembered, and lies eventually exposed." Charlotte Blackwood smoothed her Queen Elizabeth costume, the ruff around her neck seeming to strangle her. "Is this necessary? We've already told you we all had motive. We all wanted Vivian dead." "Wanting and doing are separated by a very great distance, madame. Let us discover who crossed that distance." The detective withdrew his notebook. "Dr. Pemberton, as my host and the one who brought me into this affair, perhaps you would begin." The dentist exchanged glances with his wife Patricia, dressed as Cleopatra. "We arrived at the mansion at 7 with our 2 children. The plan was to start at the front entrance and work our way through the house following Vivian's designated route. But our youngest, Emma, felt sick," Patricia interrupted. "Too much candy before proper dinner. We took her outside to the garden for air. We were there from roughly 7:15 to 7:45. Conveniently alone and unobserved during the crucial period." The detective made a note. "Continue." Richard Sterling stood by the fireplace, his vampire costume's cape swirling with theatrical effect. "My family was on schedule. We entered at 7, moved through the ground floor rooms, reached the second floor around 7:20. We were in the blue parlour when we heard— Actually, we didn't hear anything. That's strange, isn't it? You'd think there would have been a scream." "The red room is soundproofed," James Hartley offered. "Vivian installed it for her music practice. She played violin. Badly." "How convenient that no one heard the murder," Amanda Hartley murmured. Her Scarlett O'Hara costume seemed to mock the tragedy. "It's almost as if someone knew about the soundproofing." "Everyone knew," Charlotte Blackwood snapped. "Vivian mentioned it constantly. She was proud of her renovations." The detective raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Sterling, you were in the blue parlour? With your family?" "With my wife Jennifer and our son Marcus. But Marcus ran ahead. You know how children are on Halloween. He disappeared into one of the rooms. We spent several minutes looking for him." "Which gave either of you time to slip away," Dr. Pemberton observed. "So, did your daughter's convenient illness?" Sterling shot back. "Monsieur, please." The detective's tone could have frozen fire. "You waste my time with accusations. I ask only for facts. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, your movements?" James Hartley's Renaissance nobleman costume looked increasingly ridiculous as he squirmed. "We followed behind the Sterlings. Our daughter Sophie was with us until she wasn't. She wandered off somewhere around 7:30. Teenagers, you understand. They don't want to be seen with parents at their age." "How very convenient that everyone's children disappeared," the detective noted dryly. "It creates windows of opportunity for every family. Mr. and Mrs. Chen?" Michael and Lisa Chen, dressed as Hollywood vampires, spoke simultaneously, then stopped, gesturing for the other to continue. Finally, Michael said, "We were in the trophy room with our twins at 7:30, but there was a problem with the fog machine. It started producing too much fog. Lisa went to find Celeste to fix it. I stayed with the children." "How long was Mrs. Chen absent?" 10 minutes? 15? Time becomes fluid when you're chasing 8-year-olds through a haunted house." Lisa Chen's voice hardened. "I didn't kill Vivian, if that's what you're implying. I went to the conservatory looking for Celeste. She wasn't there. I came back. The conservatory where Miss Ashcroft claims she spent the relevant period." The detective made another note. "Interesting. And finally, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood?" Charlotte touched her pearl necklace again. a nervous gesture the detective had catalogued. "We were late arriving. Traffic in Kensington on Halloween is impossible. We didn't enter the house until 7:40. By then—" She gestured helplessly. "By then, Mrs. Ashcroft was already dead," the detective finished, "which either clears you or makes you the most clever, arriving after the deed to establish an alibi." "This is absurd!" Robert Blackwood stood abruptly. "We're all dancing around the obvious. One of us killed her. We probably all wanted to. What difference does it make which one actually did it? The woman was a parasite, a blackmailer, a human being," the detective said quietly, "whose murder requires justice." The room fell silent. Chapter 5. The Patterns in Blood. The detective returned to the Red Room alone, preferring to conduct his detailed examination without the nervous energy of suspects hovering nearby. The body remained where it had fallen. The police had still not been notified, a delay that troubled him more with each passing hour. He knelt beside Vivian Ashcroft's corpse, studying not the wound but the victim's hands. Her manicured nails were unbroken. No defensive wounds marked her arms. This woman had been struck down without warning, without time to struggle or protect herself. "She trusted her killer," he murmured to the empty room, or at least did not perceive them as a threat until too late. The crystal candy dish drew his attention next. Its ornate design had fractured into a dozen pieces, but the detective's careful fingers reassembled them on the floor, a morbid jigsaw puzzle. Something about the distribution pattern troubled him. The largest fragments lay not near the body, but scattered toward the door, as if thrown rather than simply dropped. He stood, moving to the full-length mirrors that lined one wall. The Red Room's infamous mirrors had been Vivian's pride, their gilt frames imported from French chateaux, their reflective surfaces showing the room from multiple angles, including angles that revealed blood spatter invisible from the body's position. The detective photographed the spatter with his phone's camera, enlarging the images to study droplet patterns. Years of experience reading violent death's typography told him the story. The killer had stood approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, right-handed, and had struck downward with significant force. But more than that. "The blood," he whispered, "tells me you wore something that caught the spatter. Something green." He turned slowly, examining the room with fresh eyes. Celeste Ashcroft's Medusa costume was green. So was the fabric on several of the room's decorative pillows. Green velvet curtains framed the windows. The Halloween decorations included green lights, green streamers, green— The detective paused at a side table, where the candy bowl sat half-filled with expensive imported chocolates. He picked up the bowl, noting its position relative to where the body lay. If Vivian had been preparing for trick-or-treaters, surely this bowl should have been full, not half-empty, unless she'd never intended to hand out candy at all. "Because you were planning your fake kidnapping," he said to the silent corpse. "You needed the trick-or-treating as cover, but you yourself would not be participating, so the candy bowl was never filled completely." He examined the chocolates themselves, noting their variety. Swiss, Belgian, French, each wrapper bore designer labels. Vivian Ashcroft had spent perhaps £200 on candy for an event she'd never intended to complete. But someone knew. The detective returned to the body. "Someone discovered your plan, your ransom note, your scheme to destroy Richard Sterling. Someone decided to stop you." He knelt again, this time examining the blood that had pooled beneath Vivian's head. The pattern suggested she'd fallen forward, as previously noted, but something about the angle troubled him. He withdrew a small measuring tape, checking distances between the body, the candy dish fragments, and the door. "The geometry is wrong," he announced to no one. "You could not have fallen this way from where you stood when struck, unless—" The detective rose and walked to where he believed the murder had occurred, standing in that spot, looking toward the door. From this position he could see into the hallway through the Red Room's open doorway, could see anyone approaching, could see— "A mirror," he breathed. "There is a mirror in the hallway positioned to show someone entering the room before they were actually visible from inside. You were watching for someone specific, waiting for them." He moved into the hallway, examining the antique mirror mounted there. Its surface showed the Red Room's entrance. Clearly, providing warning of approaching visitors, a useful tool for a blackmailer who valued advanced warning of confrontation, or for a daughter who needed to know when her mother was vulnerable. The detective returned to the Red Room and stood before the largest mirror, studying his own reflection alongside the crime scene. Something about Celeste Ashcroft's statement had troubled him. She'd claimed to be in the conservatory, to have seen her mother last at 7:15, to have been thinking about her impossible situation, but the blood spatter on her Medusa costume told a different story. Those stains were positioned exactly where they would be if she'd been standing over her mother when the blow was struck, and the serpents in her headpiece. The detective had noticed something caught in their coils earlier, dismissed it as stage blood or theatrical decoration. He photographed the room from multiple angles, creating a visual record of the scene before it could be disturbed further. Then he collected the candy bowl, noting that beneath the chocolates lay a folded piece of paper, the ransom note draft. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Confession. The detective found Celeste Ashcroft exactly where he'd left her, in the conservatory among her mother's orchids. She hadn't moved, hadn't attempted to clean her costume, hadn't tried to flee. She'd been waiting for him to return, waiting for the truth to catch up with her. "You knew I would come back," the detective said, settling onto the wrought-iron bench beside her. "You're too clever not to see it." She touched the blood on her costume gently, as if it were something precious rather than incriminating. "I thought about running. But where would I go? And what would be the point?" "Tell me what happened, mademoiselle. The truth this time." Celeste drew a shuddering breath. "I lied about the timeline. I was with Mother in the Red Room at 7:30. I decided to make one final attempt to stop her, to convince her the ransom scheme was madness. I brought the candy bowl with me. I was pretending to help with final preparations. But she refused to listen. Worse than that. She laughed at me, said I was weak just like my father, said the Sterling family deserved what was coming to them, that all the families did. She called her blackmail justice for people who thought money could buy them immunity from consequences. Celeste's voice cracked. I tried to explain that she'd become the very thing she claimed to hate, but she wouldn't hear it. And then she turned her back on me, literally turned away, dismissing me like I was nothing, and I saw the candy dish in my hands and I thought if I stopped her just this once, maybe I could save something. Save her from herself, or save the families she was about to destroy, or save my own soul from watching her do these terrible things without trying to stop her. The detective's voice remained gentle. You struck her. I struck her. One blow. She fell so quickly, Monsieur Poirot, so quickly. And there was blood, so much blood, and I stood there holding this ridiculous crystal dish thinking, what have I done? What have I done? But I knew what I'd done. I'd killed my mother. Yet you did not call for help. No. Celeste met his eyes. Because in that moment, I realized something. All those families, they had reasons to want her dead. All of them could have done it. If I positioned the scene correctly, made it look like one of them had snapped during trick-or-treating, then maybe you would escape justice, the detective finished. No. Then maybe I would deserve what was coming to me, but they wouldn't have to suffer for my crime. She laughed bitterly. It was stupid, I know, but I thought if the police believed one of the families did it, they'd investigate, find all Mother's blackmail evidence, expose all those secrets anyway. The families would be ruined, but if I confessed, at least only one life would be destroyed instead of 7. A noble thought, however flawed in execution. The detective stood, pacing among the orchids. But you made several mistakes, mademoiselle. The blood spatter on your costume places you at the scene. The candy bowl was never properly filled, suggesting your mother never intended to participate in trick-or-treating. And the ransom note, you hid it in the bowl itself, the weapon, where it would eventually be found. I panicked. I didn't know what to do with it. Mother had the draft in her pocket, and I couldn't leave it there because then the police would know about the fake kidnapping plan, and that would implicate me because who else knew about it? So I took it, and when I was carrying the candy bowl to place it near the body, I just shoved the note inside. And the families? When did you realize they suspected you? Celeste's smile was sad. Almost immediately, when we all gathered in the drawing room after finding the body. They kept looking at me with these strange expressions. Not accusation exactly. More like, understanding, sympathy. They'd all wanted Mother dead. They understood why I did it. Did they tell you they would protect you? Not explicitly, but there was an unspoken agreement. They hired you not to find the killer, but to keep their secrets safe. If you discovered one of them did it, that would fulfill the deal. If you discovered I did it, she paused, I think they would have protected me anyway. The detective turned to face her fully. Why do you think that, mademoiselle? Because I saved them from something worse than blackmail. Mother's kidnapping scheme would have destroyed Richard Sterling completely. But more than that, it would have shown them that her cruelty had no limits, that she would escalate forever. By killing her, I ended that. I gave them their lives back. At the cost of your own. Some costs are worth paying. Chapter 7. The Council of Secrets. The detective assembled the 6 families again, this time in Vivian's library, a room lined with leather-bound books that had never been read, their spines uncracked, their pages pristine. Decoration masquerading as education, much like Vivian herself had been appearance masquerading as substance. Celeste stood beside him, her Medusa costume now a costume in truth, the woman inside it transformed by confession into something both more and less than she'd been before. I have gathered you here, the detective began, to tell you a story about murder, blackmail, and the curious nature of justice. We know who killed her, Charlotte Blackwood said quietly. We've known since shortly after the body was found. This surprised him, though he allowed no visible reaction. You suspected Miss Ashcroft? We deduced it, Richard Sterling corrected, through our own miniature investigation while you were examining the scene. The timeline didn't work for any of us to have done it without being seen by others. The families were moving through the house in a coordinated pattern. But Celeste was alone, had access to her mother, had been discovered unconscious of her presence in the conservatory. And yet you said nothing. What was there to say? James Hartley spread his hands. We'd just been freed from a blackmailer who'd made our lives hell. Were we supposed to turn in the young woman who'd saved us? The detective studied each face in turn. So, you collectively decided to obscure the truth, to hire me not to solve the crime, but to prevent its solution. We hired you to use your discretion, Dr. Pemberton said carefully. We'd heard you were not simply a detective, but a man of principle. We hoped you might find a way to balance the scales of justice. You hoped I would discover the truth and then suppress it. We hoped you would understand the difference between legal justice and actual justice. Patricia Pemberton's voice carried surprising steel. Vivienne was planning something far worse than blackmail. Celeste told us about the ransom scheme. Her mother was going to frame Richard, destroy his company, send him to prison for securities fraud. She was going to fake a kidnapping and let the police tear Richard's life apart, looking for evidence of something he didn't do. I would have been ruined, Sterling said quietly. My family destroyed. The investigation would have revealed the securities violations. I won't lie about that. I made mistakes. But I was working to correct them. Vivian's scheme would have ensured I went to prison before I could make things right. The detective turned to Celeste. Did they know about the kidnapping plan before you told them? No. I told them after the body was found. After I realized they suspected me. I wanted them to understand why I did it. Her voice broke slightly. I needed someone to understand. And we did, Amanda Hartley said firmly. We do. Monsieur Poirot, Celeste Ashcroft committed murder. We're not denying that. But she committed murder to prevent something worse. Doesn't context matter? Doesn't intention matter? Context and intention matter very much, madam, but they do not erase murder. The detective walked to the library window, looking out at the street where Halloween decorations still cast false cheer over genuine tragedy. You present me with a moral dilemma. If I report what I know, Miss Ashcroft goes to prison for killing her mother. If I remain silent, she escapes legal justice, but perhaps not moral justice. What would you have done, Michael Chen asked, if you'd discovered that plan that your mother was going to destroy innocent people with an elaborate fraud? Would you have let it happen? I've never faced that choice, monsieur, but I know this. Murder is not a solution. It is merely a different problem. Easy to say when you're not the one being destroyed, Lisa Chen muttered. The detective turned back to face them. You wish me to make a decision, then? To be judge, jury, and executioner in this matter? We wish you to be Hercule Poirot, Charlotte Blackwood said, the man who understands that justice is not always found in courtrooms. A long silence stretched through the library. Finally, the detective spoke. Very well. I will tell you what I propose. Chapter 8. The Weight of Mercy. The detective's proposal was simple in theory, complex in execution, truth balanced against consequences, justice tempered with mercy, law measured against morality. Miss Ashcroft will confess to the police, he began, ignoring the immediate protests. She will tell them she killed her mother during a confrontation about the blackmail scheme. The ransom note, he withdrew the folded paper from his pocket, will not be mentioned. Your secrets, messieurs and mesdames, will remain secret. But Celeste will go to prison, James Hartley objected. Perhaps, perhaps not. The English legal system allows for concepts like manslaughter, provocation, diminished responsibility. A young woman who discovered her mother was a blackmailer, confronted her, and struck out in a moment of emotional distress. That is quite different from premeditated murder. Celeste's voice was barely audible. You want me to lie about the kidnapping plan? I want you to tell a version of the truth that acknowledges your crime while protecting others who did not commit crimes. The detective met her eyes. Your mother was a blackmailer. That fact is incontrovertible and will emerge during investigation regardless of what we do. You confronted her about her blackmail activities. She dismissed you, turned her back on you. In that moment of rage and desperation, you struck her. All of this is true, is it not? Celeste nodded slowly. Yes, all of that is true. Then we omit only one detail, the specific scheme she was planning for Halloween night. That scheme died with her. It need not be resurrected to destroy Mr. Sterling or anyone else. The detective turned to the assembled families. You will cooperate fully with the police investigation. You will admit you were being blackmailed. You will provide whatever evidence you possess. The scandal will be considerable, but it will be survivable. And what of you? Richard Sterling asked. You were hired to protect our secrets. If you reveal them, aren't you violating that contract? You hired me under false pretenses, monsieur. You told me you wanted my discretion, but what you really wanted was my complicity. I'm willing to offer the former, but never the latter. The detective's voice hardened. However, I'm also practical. Miss Ashcroft's confession will provide the police with their murderer. They will have little reason to dig deeper into your specific secrets once they understand the general nature of Mrs. Ashcroft's blackmail operation. Dr. Pemberton leaned forward. You're saying, if we admit to being blackmailed, but don't specify what she had on us, the investigation will likely accept that. The investigation will focus on the murder, not on reconstructing every detail of the victim's criminal enterprise, particularly when the murderer confesses, particularly when that confession is supported by physical evidence. The detective gestured to Celeste's costume. The blood spatter, the timing, the opportunity, it all supports Miss Ashcroft's guilt. The police will be satisfied. But I'll still go to prison, Celeste whispered. Perhaps. Or perhaps a skilled barrister will argue successfully for manslaughter, for a reduced sentence, for mercy given the circumstances. You are young, you have no criminal history, you are under extraordinary emotional duress. These factors matter in sentencing. Charlotte Blackwood stood abruptly. This is insane. We're discussing sending a girl who saved us all to prison. There must be another way. There is always another way, madame. Murder, cover-up, conspiracy. Would you prefer those alternatives? The detective's tone could have frozen lava. Miss Ashcroft took a life. That debt must be paid. The only question is how much she pays and whether others pay unnecessarily alongside her. He's right. Celeste's voice carried surprising strength. I killed my mother. I don't get to escape that because my reasons were sympathetic. Monsieur Poirot is offering me the best possible outcome, truth without total destruction. But the trial, Amanda Hartley protested. The publicity. Everyone will know about Vivienne's blackmail. Everyone will know she was a blackmailer, the detective corrected. They need not know the specifics of what she held over each of you. That is what I offer. General truth that protects specific secrets. Michael Chen crossed to Celeste, placing a hand on her shoulder. If you do this, we'll support you. Character witnesses, financial support for legal fees, whatever you need. All of us, Lisa Chen added, will make sure you have the best defense possible. And after. Celeste looked around at the families. After the trial, after whatever sentence I serve, what then? Then you'll have paid your debt, Richard Sterling said quietly. Then you'll have a life ahead of you, a real life, not one lived in fear of your mother's schemes or in hiding from your own guilt. The detective watched this exchange with interest. The families were closing ranks around Celeste, transforming from potential suspects into actual allies. It was, he reflected, a curious form of honour among people who'd been living under dishonourable circumstances. There remains one question, Dr. Pemberton said. Why are you doing this, Monsieur Poirot? You could have reported everything, the kidnapping scheme, our specific secrets, all of it. You could have exposed us all. The detective was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. Finally he spoke. Because I have learned, messieurs and mesdames, that justice is not always served by the strict letter of the law. Because Miss Ashcroft's crime, while inexcusable, prevented other crimes perhaps equally grave. Because you, all of you, are not innocent, but neither are you guilty of murder. And because sometimes the role of the detective is not to punish, but to understand. Not to judge, but to weigh. Not to destroy, but to preserve what can be preserved while acknowledging what must be lost. He turned to Celeste. You will call the police now. You will confess to them. And whatever comes after, that will be as it should be. Celeste nodded, tears streaming down her face, washing away the last of her Medusa makeup. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for understanding, for this chance. Do not thank me yet, mademoiselle. The difficult part has just begun. As she left to make the phone call that would end one life and perhaps begin another, the detective remained with the families. These people bound together now not by blackmail, but by shared burden, by collective mercy, by the weight of secrets they would carry forward into whatever futures awaited them. Outside, Halloween continued. Children laughed, candy was collected, the innocents celebrated while inside the Ashcroft mansion, innocence ended, and something else, something more complicated, more human, more real, took its place. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The police arrived within 20 minutes, their blue lights strobing through Halloween decorations in a macabre light show that drew neighbours from their homes. Inspector Cartwright, a solid man with iron-grey hair and sceptical eyes, took charge of the scene with practised efficiency. The detective observed from the library window as uniformed officers cordoned off the property and forensic specialists began their methodical documentation of death. He'd given his statement to Cartwright, a careful recitation of facts that omitted nothing material while revealing nothing unnecessary. She confessed, Cartwright had asked, his eyebrows rising. Just like that? Just like that, Inspector, Miss. Ashcroft killed her mother during a confrontation about blackmail activities. The physical evidence supports her confession. You'll find blood spatter on her costume consistent with standing over the victim when the blow was struck. The murder weapon is the crystal candy dish, fragments of which remain at the scene. And these families, Cartwright gestured toward the 6 couples being questioned separately by his officers. What's their involvement? They were Mrs. Ashcroft's blackmail victims. They hired me to investigate, hoping to keep their specific secrets confidential, even if the general crime was exposed. I've advised them to cooperate fully with your investigation. How generous of you. Cartwright's tone was dry. And these secrets they're so worried about? Are theirs to reveal or conceal as they choose, Inspector. They are victims of crime, not perpetrators, unless your investigation reveals otherwise. Cartwright had studied him with those sceptical eyes, but ultimately nodded. Fair enough, though I reserve the right to dig deeper if something doesn't add up. I would expect nothing less from Scotland Yard. Now, watching the organised chaos below, the detective reflected on the curious nature of truth. He had told Cartwright everything necessary for justice, that Celeste Ashcroft had killed her mother, how she'd done it, what physical evidence existed, why she'd done it. The kidnapping scheme remained unmentioned, not because it was irrelevant, but because it was unnecessary. The murder could be prosecuted without it. And yet, omission felt uncomfortably close to deception. Second thoughts? Dr. Pemberton joined him at the window. It's not too late to tell them everything. It is always too late for complete honesty, monsieur. The moment we choose what to say, we also choose what not to say. I have simply chosen more carefully than usual. Because of Celeste. Because of all of you. The detective turned from the window. Tell me, in your professional capacity, how long would you estimate Mrs. Ashcroft had been dead when we examined the body? Dr. Pemberton blinked at the change of subject. I'm a dentist, not a medical examiner. But you have training. You examined the body with me. Your estimate? 90 minutes, perhaps. The blood had begun to dry, the body was cooling but still retained warmth. Why? Because 90 minutes takes us back to 7:30, the exact time Miss Ashcroft claims she killed her mother. Yet the families began their trick-or-treat route at 7 o'clock. For 30 minutes before the murder, Mrs. Ashcroft was alive, preparing her red room, waiting for something or someone. Waiting for the fake kidnapping, Dr. Pemberton said slowly, or waiting for her daughter, waiting for a confrontation she perhaps anticipated. The detective's eyes gleamed. That is what troubles me, monsieur. Mrs. Ashcroft was an intelligent woman. Whatever her moral failings, she must have known her daughter had. Discovered the ransom note drafts. She must have known Celeste would try to stop her. So why was she alone in the red room at 7:30? Maybe she thought Celeste wouldn't actually do anything. Parents often underestimate their children. Perhaps. Or perhaps she wanted to be alone for a different reason entirely. Before Dr. Pemberton could respond, Celeste appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 police officers. Her Medusa costume had been photographed and documented. Now she wore a borrowed coat that made her seem smaller, younger, more vulnerable. "They're taking me to the station," she said quietly. "For formal questioning. Inspector Cartwright says I'll be charged with manslaughter, possibly murder, depending on the Crown Prosecution's assessment." The detective crossed to her. "Remember what we discussed. Truth without embellishment. Facts without speculation. You confronted your mother about her blackmail. She dismissed you. You struck her. You immediately regretted it. All of this is true. And if they ask about what specifically she was blackmailing people about, you tell them you don't know the details. Your mother kept her blackmail files locked in her private safe, which she never opened in your presence. Also true, I assume?" Celeste nodded. She was paranoid about security. "I never saw inside that safe." "Then you cannot testify about what you never saw." The detective's voice gentled. "Be strong, mademoiselle. This storm will pass." As the officers led her away, Charlotte Blackwood approached, her Queen Elizabeth costume now seeming absurdly theatrical against the grim reality of police investigation. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait," the detective replied. "We wait for justice to take its course, and we hope that justice proves merciful." "And if it doesn't?" The detective had no answer for that. Chapter 10. The Verdict of Conscience. 3 months later, the detective received a letter postmarked from London. He opened it in his rooms while afternoon light slanted through windows, casting shadows that moved like memories across familiar walls. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I write to inform you that my trial concluded yesterday. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a verdict of voluntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced me to 5 years imprisonment, with possibility of parole after 3. My barrister, funded by the 6 families, as promised, argued successfully that I acted under severe emotional distress, that my mother's systematic blackmail of innocent families represented a form of psychological abuse that extended to me, and that my confession and cooperation demonstrated genuine remorse. The families testified on my behalf. Each of them stood in that courtroom and admitted publicly that my mother had been blackmailing them. They didn't reveal the specifics of their secrets. You were right. The prosecution didn't press for those details once the general pattern of blackmail was established. But they made it clear that Vivian Ashcroft had been tormenting them for years. Richard Sterling was particularly effective. He broke down while describing how my mother's schemes had driven him to the edge of suicide. I didn't know that. I'd saved his life without realizing it. I wanted to tell you that I'm at peace with the verdict. 5 years is less than I deserve, perhaps, but more than nothing, it allows me to pay my debt while still having a life afterward. That's the gift you gave me, Monsieur Poirot. Not freedom from consequences, but proportion in consequences. Justice tempered with mercy. There's something else I need to tell you, something I couldn't say before. My mother knew I'd found the ransom note drafts. She knew I'd discovered her kidnapping scheme. The day before Halloween, she confronted me about it. She told me that if I interfered with her plans, she'd frame me for theft from her accounts. She'd been embezzling from her own trust fund and had created false records showing I was responsible. So you see, I killed her, not just to protect the Sterling family, or to stop her from getting worse. I killed her in self-defense, in a way. She was about to destroy me. I still couldn't tell the police this, because to prove it, they would have needed to see those account records, and that would have revealed her embezzlement, and the investigation would have spread to her other financial crimes, and inevitably they would have discovered exactly what she had on each family. Your careful protection of their secrets would have unravelled, so I kept silent about that part, and I'll continue keeping silent. Some truths don't need to be told. The families visit me regularly. Charlotte Blackwood brings books, the Chens bring news from the outside world. Dr. and Mrs. Pemberton bring hope. They've started a victims advocacy group for people targeted by blackmailers. They're turning their experience into something positive. And Richard Sterling has promised me a job when I'm released. Executive assistant, he says. Someone who understands the value of discretion and second chances. I don't know if I'm being forgiven or simply used again. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither matters as much as the fact that I'm being given a future. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for understanding that justice isn't always found in courtrooms or punishment. Thank you for seeing me as more than a murderer, even though that's what I am. I am grateful, and I will carry your mercy with me always. Yours sincerely, Celeste Ashcroft. The detective folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, alongside other correspondence from other cases where truth and justice had proven uncomfortable companions. He thought about Vivian Ashcroft, dead these 3 months, her blackmail empire dissolved, her victims freed, her elaborate schemes ended by a single blow from a crystal dish. He thought about her daughter, imprisoned but not destroyed, paying her debt but retaining her dignity. He thought about the 6 families, scarred but surviving, their secrets still secret, their lives continuing in the specific ways lives continue after trauma, haltingly, imperfectly, but continuing nonetheless. And he thought about himself, Hercule Poirot, detective and judge, solver of puzzles and weigher of souls, who had chosen on Halloween night to serve not law, but something more complicated, something more human, something that might, in the end, more closely resemble actual justice than anything found in legal codes. Was I right? He asked the empty room. The empty room offered no answer, but later that evening, as he prepared for bed, he received a phone call from Dr. Pemberton. Just wanted to thank you again, Monsieur Poirot. The victims advocacy group is really taking off. We've helped 3 people escape blackmail situations in the past month. Real help, legal help, the kind Vivian's victims needed but never got. That is good work, monsieur. It's Celeste's work, really. Her story inspired it. The idea that you can fight back against blackmailers without becoming a murderer yourself. A pause. She did the wrong thing, but maybe something right has come from it. Perhaps, the detective said carefully, or perhaps what comes from tragedy is what we choose to make of it. After the call ended, he stood at his window looking out at London's nighttime sprawl, this city of millions of lives, millions of secrets, millions of small moral compromises that somehow coalesced into something resembling civilization. I was right, he told himself finally, or right enough, which is all one can hope for in an imperfect world. And Hercule Poirot, who had solved the Halloween night blackmail through deduction, observation, and an understanding of human nature deeper than most people achieved, went to bed satisfied that he had served justice, even if justice had looked different than he'd expected. This is Stephen, signing off from Cozy Mysteries. The Halloween night blackmail reminds us that truth is not always simple, justice is not always clean, and sometimes the greatest mysteries are not who committed the crime, but why, and what we choose to do about it afterward. The detective solved his case not by finding the murderer. That was simple, but by deciding what to do with that knowledge. In the end, perhaps that's the harder mystery, not discovering truth, but determining what truth serves. Until next time, when another mystery awaits in the shadows, remember that justice, like the best detective stories, is never quite as straightforward as it seems. Good night.